Hi guys, welcome back to the Astro Imaging channel. Today's session is basically just a discussion on anything. I will be honest, we have a lot of good discussions before and after these sessions where there isn't a topic or a presentation or anything like that. We basically are just chatting about astronomy. And I'd like to have some of that translate to you guys. So I have posted a link in Google+. If you go to your Google+ page, if you could find that, there's a link to this live room. You can basically get right in and join in the conversation, and if you have topics to bring up or you have something to comment on live, you can. Otherwise, you're stuck to typing it into Q&A. I think you guys know where that is, top right screen, just hover over it. Let me make sure that's active in the meantime. It's active right now. So that'll be your shot to ask your questions. But check out that link if you want to join in. All I'll say is mute your mic at first, just in case we get some sort of feedback. You don't want to be that guy. Oh yeah, and of course, before we do that, I didn't even do this. Our image of the week goes to Jason Gunzel again, and I'm going to, well, you know what I'm going to do? Let's see if you pick up on this. Oh, I'm not sharing my screen. You're not going to pick up on this. Let me go to my full screen share, and I'm going to show off Jason Gunzel's image on this beautiful, shiny new website. We are, and of course I'd have to click this for you guys to see me, and I'm not going to do that, otherwise we have some funky stuff going on. But yeah, we put our new website up. It's pretty much ready for prime time, but if you guys want to check it out, theastroimagingchannel.com. Check it out. You can get into our live session as they go. You can see all our past live shows. There's a directory in there. You can see our past image of the weeks. There's links to stuff, ways to contact us. It's basically all in there. So now I can say just go to our website. I don't have to go around describing all this convoluted Google Plus stuff. You still have to submit the image of the week on Google Plus, but it's just the way it is. But let me show you image of the week. Go right in there and you can see Jason Gunzel one more time. This time with his NGC 1961. I had to look at that. Not a common galaxy. Not one I've seen. I don't know how frequently I've seen this, but not frequently at all. And really just a cool looking galaxy. I called it funky, and Josh called it funky in the comments, and I think that describes it well. Just an irregular, funky looking galaxy. And I was happy I didn't put it together last week, but Jason is 13 on cloudy nights. So I'm glad to have finally made that connection. But yeah, Jason, thanks for submitting. And the way we're going to start doing it now is this is our image of the week for this week. Jason, if you want to come on next week and talk about your image, you're welcome to come on. And we'll have a new image for the following week. And yeah, like I said, guys, in the meantime, go to our website, theastroimagingchannel.com. Check it out. Try and break it. Don't DDoS us, but play around. If you see stuff you're not crazy about, let us know, and we'll see if we can either change it or maybe we'll ignore you. But but either way. So yeah, moving on. There were a few good topics suggested, and I had a few good topics in mind for tonight. And since one of them was one of the topics I had in mind, I'm going to go at it. And I'll tell you, the reason I'm bringing this up is not because I think I can explain it to you well or I can give you a better understanding about this. It's because I don't think my understanding of this is good enough. And I think that we all may have some assumptions, and we all hear the way theory works or theory describes it, and we kind of hang by those numbers. But it's kind of like the theory behind image sensors, where you pay a lot to get a little. And I wonder whether this is one of those cases. So I'm going to start off image resolution. And Josh had done a test with his FSQ85 and his QSI, Sony censored QSI. So basically small pixels, and we'll call it a small scope. And what's he looking at? What's he showing off in that image is small galaxies around what the Dirichlet group, right? Around NGC 7331. And Stephan's quintet. I think I'm right about that field. So you probably know the field. Very, very small galaxies, and he's shooting it with an FSQ an 85 millimeter telescope that's fast, and a small sensor. Is this what technology is getting us? Is this like the magic that's happening? On the converse side of that, should Josh be concerned that he's losing light around the edges of his sensor? He could be going with a bigger sensor that could get a little bit more, but maybe not resolve that as well. And if there is anyone that has any great insight on this or has any rhetorical questions they'd like to throw in, feel free. I don't know, Josh. What's been your experience with the exactly what we're talking about?
So I definitely think the technology is letting a couple of new ways of imaging come about. Obviously, some of these Sony sensors with the smaller pixels are, letting you get better resolution with these small scopes, and when you combine that with really great optics and a small spot size, it lets you pretty much get the most out of your seeing. You still have to up your integration time by quite a bit to get something to match it, but my scale is pretty much limited by my seeing right now. If I've tried to go quite a bit smaller, down to like 1 second a pixel and smaller than that, and I didn't really see a big improvement based on that. So I kind of decided that it doesn't make sense to shoot for much more. So actually, the interesting thing is, earlier this spring, I was shooting with an FSQ 106 and an 8300 sensor, and I did all the math to figure out that it is pretty much exactly the same field of view, scale, and imaging sensitivity as the 85 and the 690. And when I went to actually take exposures of them, I was getting pretty much exactly the same thing. From same spot under the same conditions, I was sky limited at the same time. The data looked very similar. So I think that if you're not shooting for super high resolution stuff, I think it's an awesome way to go. If you're not I wouldn't use this as a setup to go after small galaxies, but I think for any kind of nebula, it's pretty much plenty of resolution, and for quite a few of the medium-sized galaxies, it's plenty of resolution. I do think that some of what we're seeing that's probably going to be the other new wave of the future that I'd like to try, and is actually probably pretty affordable, is throwing some of these new cameras with the 2.5 or 4 micron pixels and doing lucky imaging on SCTs and DOBs on EQ platforms. So that is probably my next experiment with this kind of affordable high-resolution imaging, is going to be doing lucky imaging on like my 10-inch DOB, where guys are stacking thousands of 1 and 2 second images. There's a few examples in Cloudy Nights recently, and Astrobin, of somebody taking the core of the M42 and taking a couple other galaxies that I can't remember which one it was now. I think 4565. With 1 second exposures, and the resolution is just stunning. The stars are super tight, and the details are great. I'll be curious to see how that works when people actually go after nebulas that are quite a bit fainter than that. But I think that's another new wave of the future that's going to come out because of the technology on these cameras that have very low read noise.
Yeah, really interesting. And I always wonder, with our targets having such low contrast, does that really mean that if we can eke more contrast out of them? Because you're, in a sense, and you went from a 106 to an 85, so that's not gonna exemplify what I'm talking about so well. But someone like me who has an SCT and could buy a Sony sensor, and I think something in the 100 millimeter range for a similar field, that's most likely going to be a faster telescope. So, in some senses, and this is kind of it becomes hard to explain when you have a lot of factors going on. But there, in some senses, I think that resolution doesn't necessarily become important unless you have a high enough signal-to-noise ratio where the resolution is kind of your limit when you're looking at it and saying, okay, well, you know what? There's not the noise isn't distracting from the resolution, but it's not as sharp as I would expect. So I always think that you know, it's contrast and resolution for the lens, but it's more signal-to-noise ratio for the sensor, and compromising of any one of those three to get a good image, or hoping not to compromise any of them. But
Yeah, Adam, I'll jump in here a little bit. So I mean, you know, there's multiple things that go into image resolution, right? You know, and as Josh is showing that, you know, even with his 85 millimeter, if he has small pixels, he can do a pretty good job of getting close to the seeing limit in his area, right?
mm-hmm.
So, you know, seeing is one, atmospheric seeing is one aspect. The aperture of the scope is another. The spot size relative to the pixel size is important, and then obviously the pixel size relative to the focal length. All those things kind of come together, right, to determine what kind of resolution you're going to be able to achieve, right? And so it's that whole mix, right? And obviously, you know, with small pixels and, you know, a reasonably sized aperture scope, you can get pretty close to the seeing that most of us have, which is not really all that great, right? So, and like Josh said, you know, you're not going to get the best resolution you could possibly achieve, you know, so it's not necessarily the best solution for small galaxies and things like that. But, you know, for a lot of things, it's going to do very well and get you a good field of view and everything. And it's a nice light setup that's easily moved around.
Mm-hmm.
Well, not only is it easily moved around, but the mount can guide with it better. So if you're not using an astrophysics or one of the other bigger mounts, you know, if you put a 11-inch scope on there, you're not probably going to be able to guide well enough to take advantage of it. So if you think of it as a whole system, I don't think my Atlas would carry an 11-inch SCT nearly as well as this, or my Sirius, which is what I've been using recently. So, you know, it's kind of interesting when you look at it from a total system perspective that probably can't do much better resolution-wise, regardless of what scope is on there, if the mount can't handle the scope.
Right. It's not something you'd send to New Mexico or some dark sky site with great seeing, but it's something that'd treat you pretty well in your driveway, and make you a pretty happy astrophotographer. I saw Eric trying to comment on that.
Yeah, I was curious about Josh's comment about lucky imaging. In that case, are you binning? Because otherwise you're going to be limited by your download speed, aren't you? So what are they doing? Are treating it kind of like a video camera with a bin 2 or bin 3?
I'm not actually. I'm probably qualified to answer this because I don't know enough about those new cameras. But I don't think that they are binning. I think that some of those new cameras are actually made for high download speeds. I don't know if either you guys are familiar enough with them.
Yeah, I use because I started off doing planetary before getting into DSO, so you don't bin them at all. So you do maximize the resolution that they're running at. So as an example, when I was running my my Edge HD 1100 with my PGR Fleet 3, I think I was down around 0.5 or 0.4 arc seconds per pixel. So regardless of the seeing, what you're doing with lucky imaging is that you're just trying to capture during those moments of steadiness, during those atmospheric moments of steadiness, you're capturing the best frames, right? So as you go through, you can set like with auto staggered or Registax, you can specify what percentage of frames that you'd like to capture and then stack. So you can toss out any of the garbage ones that you want, but there's no need to bin at all. The only time that I have binned is when I used my Teleview PowerMate, and that was way, way, way too oversampled, so I would bin it by 2 just to bring it back to what I would normally have when I was using the native resolution of the system.
So this is something you might do with a high contrast, high SNR image.
Yes.
You're not going to do it with an HA image where there's very ADUs to work with, right?
Well, you could. I think there are some guys that did do, what's his name, James 7CA on Cloudy Nights. I did some hydrogen alpha imaging using lucky imaging.
Although I think
with
it was some brighter targets that he was imaging with that.
exactly, yeah. If it's high SNR objects, absolutely. I think with the read noise on those ASIs down to 1 now, I think the 224 MC I think is down to 1 electron of read noise. So sooner or later, once it gets to 0, regardless of how bright the object is, it's just a matter of, well, can you stack 16,000 individual 1-second subs to be able to capture that signal that falls within those low-lying areas.
And that's what Stan Moore is doing with the EMCCDs, which are down under 1. I think they're half an electron with 12 by 12 pixels or something like that.
Yeah, and if you also have 60 grand to spend on one, I think used they're super cheap, and of course super cheap being an incredibly relative term to an individual's financial position, but it's still not cheap.
So what about color on those? So because I'm interested in trying this, I thought my first step would just be to use my QHY2L mono to just kind of mess around and probably throw a Barlow on the 10-inch Dob so that it would come to focus. But if you were to get a planetary camera, can you get away with using color on those for lucky imaging?
Yep, I did. So when I was doing my planetary stuff, and I didn't do it for very, very long, but I was doing infrared LRGB imaging using Lucky Imaging. And it all worked out really well, and I was just doing extremely fast rates. I think my frame per second range, and it just all depends upon the gain settings that you have, was anywhere between, could be as low as 35, I think, in the blue spectrum, and then to infrared, it was high as 80 to 100, anywhere in there. So you can absolutely do it, to answer your question, yes.
So yeah, that's really cool, because one of the things that I thought about, and the first time I thought about this was at Okie Tex last year when I saw that M42. I wish I knew this guy's name, and I'll look it up so that I have it before the end of the day. I don't know if you remember his name, Hytham, but he did the 11,000 1-second exposures in each narrowband channel for the trap, and it was just an unbelievable image.
Oh,
but what
Alexander Obyukov, I can't remember his last name, the Russian guy, or
that's who I'm talking about. Yeah, I don't know how to pronounce his name.
Alexander is his first name. Last name starts with an O.
So the work he did on that was just incredible. I've never seen such detail in there. But one thing that would be very fun to do with that is something like HDR images with some of these planetary nebulas that have incredibly bright cores that are hard not to blow out even with 1-second exposures, like the cat's eye or something like that, and do that maybe with a 10-inch Dob, but then use the FSQ85 for the super faint outer shell. I think when I did a write-up on it, I think they say the outer shell is 10,000 times fainter than the inner core of it. So I think it would be kind of fun showing both sides of it and combining those into one image to do that lucky imaging on the core, which is what I did at the time with the Tech 140. I think I did 1-second images, but getting 10-inch, like Adam said, more aperture and getting that more contrast and signal-to-noise ratio. The 10-inch Dob, I think you could probably really step that up with lucky imaging.
Yeah, well, now if you're talking about lucky imaging, you might as well have a really big scope, because you're going to be getting a little bit past your seeing, or at least taking advantage of better seeing, and that goes against what we were talking about earlier. You could use the technology on the other side. It's interesting how that happens.
Yeah, it definitely opens up opportunity for a whole lot of people to get into the hobby itself, because it decreases the total amount of spend that is now required with a basic EQ platform. And I can't remember his last name. I know his first name is Emil, the writer of the AutoStacker 2 application. Yeah, he uses just a gigantic aperture Dob, relatively fast. I think it's an F5-ish system, and on a standard EQ platform. I didn't talk to him about what he's using for guiding, or if he's just using standard tracking. Guiding probably wouldn't be all that necessary with 1-second exposures.
But it is a motorized equatorial platform.
Yes,
Correct.
it is. It's definitely motorized EQ.
Well, with lucky imaging, you don't need to guide so much. I wouldn't think.
No. Yeah, as long as your polar alignment is fairly close, so that way you are still tracking the object in relatively centered fashion, I guess it wouldn't really matter. The other thing that I would think of is, well, yeah, if you're just tracking and your polar alignment isn't all that great, dithering isn't needed.
You don't even need good polar alignment. You can do it on an alt-az mount if you only need 1 second exposures.
That's true. Yeah.
If you're going for 15-second exposures, that's when it might start to come into a factor. But yeah, think about it this way: you in processing, you're getting field rotation, but that's going to be stacked out as you're processing it, as long as you don't have field rotation in the individual sub. So.
Right.
Yeah,
You could. I mean, you could probably even throw it on the something like an Atlas too. I mean, you can. It'll carry the 10-inch Dobbs for visual just fine, and so there's no reason you couldn't throw that on an Atlas too to do the same thing.
Adam, could I have your attention here? Hey, we've got the 4 topics that people have written into on the Astro Imaging channel. We've got about 8 questions here that some people really want to get answered too.
Yeah, and
what's the best use of our time here? How do we do this? Because we don't. You guys, if you think out there that we actually know what we're doing, well, I think you'll find out a lot tonight. We don't know what the agenda should be. We know that we get to sit around every now and then talking like this, but. You're here today, and you're calling in and asking questions. How should we handle this, Adam?
Yeah, I saw the first. I've been trying to track them as they popped in, and we had a list of questions in the comments of this thing. I'm going to hit a few of them real quick. I see Yanni is asking us, beginner here, do you know how much exposure time to get on a particular target? And the answer is no. And if you're talking about individual sub-exposures, then you always want to expose for the histogram. You probably, I don't know if you've heard this before, but get it off the left side so that it's, get the histogram spike off the left side, separated from the left side, so that there is sky background separating it away. For a particular target, well, that depends on the brightness of the target. If it's a really dim target, it's going to need more time. So I can't answer that question. You have to get some of the basics down to be able to figure out how much time it's going to take. You start to get a feel of these things, but there's no set limit.
I think there's a whole lot of other things you have to worry about besides the brightness of the object. You have to worry about the brightness of your skies to find out how much background light you're getting. You have to worry about how bright the object is compared to the background of your skies. You have to worry about what it is that you want to tell in your story. If you're taking a picture of the double cluster or M13, you've got a different set of parameters than if you're taking a picture of M78 or some nebulous object. In general, there is a theory around, and you can find exposure calculators based on this theory in a number of places, that you want your signal to rise, the signal of the desired object, the thing that you really want to take a picture of, you want it to rise above the background noise to a certain extent. A lot of people say that when your background noise is about 5% of your overall image background, then call it quits on that exposure and go on to the next exposure. If you want to find out what those values are, you can go to Starizona, Google Starizona CCD exposure calculator, and you'll find out what they have to say. It's a process of taking a calibrated image for, say, 30 seconds or 60 seconds and checking what your background value is on that particular image, and by clicking on a background area, and it should be a certain value if you want a certain percentage of read noise to come through. And there are various calculators that'll do that out there, including like if you're using Sequence Generator Pro and you properly input the data regarding your computer, one of these image statistics tools that you've got with Sequence Generator Pro will tell you what it would suggest as a exposure. But then that is just your exposure of the background, and you might be burning out your stars by this time. And if stars are more important to you than the background, you have to do things differently, Yanni. Okay? And other people have other ideas about that, I'm sure.
Yeah, I'll add one other thing. Alex's points are all valid. I'm not going to take away from theirs, but I'll add one additional thing, which is you have to determine what it is your object actually is that you're interested in, right? So say you're imaging M31, right? That's a huge dynamic range in that object. Are you trying to capture the outer halo or just the bright center, right? So if you're just trying to capture the bright center, then you only need it to come above the read noise and dark current levels and things like this. But if you want that outer halo, you need to actually, take some test measurements and see what that value is, so you can try to estimate how much you need to get it above, right? And there's some good calculators that can give you a good starting point, right, for those things. I wouldn't call any of the calculators out there as something that I would just take as gospel. They're a good place to start, and it's kind of a learning process of going through and varying your exposures and seeing what you get out of it, and then going through adding exposure time, seeing how your images are coming through. Do you need more? Is your signal to noise ratio high enough for what you're trying to do with your image? Do you need to add more exposure time to it? Right.
Thanks, David, because first of all, yeah, great answers. I didn't want to answer it this way, but how do you know how much time of exposure to get on a particular target? Well, experience helps. You're going to shoot all different targets. You're going to find all different... you're going to do it right. You're going to expose. You're going to separate the histogram, and you're going to say, but I wanted to bring this out of the target, and it might change that. But in general, you got some great advice already. And I see that Walter asked a similar question. And Walter, to answer your question, the exposure calculator Alex talked about is where you want to get your starting point if you really have no idea.
The one I talked about is Star Arizona. CCD exposure calculator. CCDware also has one. Sequence Generator Pro has one, so you can find them in lots of places.
Yep. And one of Yanni's other questions was, and this is a planetary question. Some of us are planetary guys, but some of us aren't. I do solar occasionally, so this is what my opinion is on it. What would you rather use for planetary, Registax or Deep Sky Stacker? I actually don't think you can use Deep Sky Stacker for planetary. Well, I shouldn't say that. I don't think you can use Deep Sky Stacker for videos. But so I would use Registax and also Auto Stacker. And I actually prefer with my solar the way Auto Stacker spits it out. And then occasionally I'll use Registax for wavelets for the most automated process.
AVI Stack 2 is also another good one.
AviStack, yep.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm seeing the questions coming in on Google too. I'm trying to nail down some of them that I think I could do quickly. Chris Keene asked, do any of us image with adaptive optics? My quick scroll around the room is that none of us do. I know Mike Miller has. He's discussed it in the past on some of the programs. I'll look into that and I'll try and get you some information on that.
Yeah, Lloyd Smith at DSW also has active optics on his 14-inch RCOS with SBIG 16803 camera on there.
Mm-hmm. Now, I want to say Mike gave up his adaptive optics for the ONAG. I think he gave it up for the ONAG. I'm not 100% certain on that. But I don't think, unless any of us are qualified to speak of that, but I'm not. What are the pros and cons of saving images in 32-bit versus 64-bit? I think that only, so if you're using, David, would you like to answer that question?
Yeah, I can answer that. So really all you're doing by going to 64-bit is increasing the volume of space. So you only really need to do that if you have a data volume over a certain amount. In general, if you're using 16-bit input images, if you go over 128, then you're going to start blowing out of the mantissa portion of the 32-bit floating point value, right? Which is, the floating points are broken up into so many bits, right? So you start blowing out of the integer portion, the actual data portion, rather than the exponent. So if you go over 128 frames in a stack with 16-bit sensors, then you want to go to a 64-bit image at that point. You also sometimes want to go to 64-bit if you're doing a high dynamic range object or something like that. So you don't need it all the time, but there are cases where it is actually useful, so you're not actually losing data when you're doing your stacking.
Yep. Great answer. Okay. Trying to move now on to some of the questions, that hit the chat first. That hit the comments first. I'm just trying to pick them in order. Well, I just saw this one pop up. acquisition technique, LRGB, HRGB, or HARGB, HAO3. What's your acquisition technique? And for me, basically HA while the moon's up, and RGB 03 while the moon is not around. And I know some people will shoot certain color channels higher up in the sky if they want to try and take advantage of the diffraction effects, or the scattering of the blue channel, I think it would be. But I haven't had luck with that. That's basically my answer to that one.
Adam, I'll comment on that one. Another thing to think about is definitely your target, and know your target and what is in your target. There's certain regions of the sky that are predominantly HA and have no reflection nebula, at which point you might be good just getting some color stars, and you don't need much RGB. It's not going to help improve your picture much, but there are some other regions of the sky that also have a lot of reflection nebula in them. So maybe like the Flaming Star Nebula is one to know. If you look on Astrobin or Flickr or wherever you look at your pictures, just see what other people are doing and see what data they're taking to emphasize certain points. But like the Flaming Star has a lot of HA in it, but it also has some very beautiful blue reflection nebula in it. So at that point, you might know, well, I want to take a little more time on my RGB to make sure that I'm actually getting that reflection nebula in there. Typically, the luminance, I shoot as much luminance as the RGB combined. I think probably Hytham and Adam do something similar to that. Some people maybe even do more luminance and less RGB. Some of the well-known guys in cloudy nights will even only shoot 1 or 2 RGB frames for each channel and shoot the rest in luminance. So definitely emphasize the luminance when shooting LRGB, because that's where you're going to get all your details and reduce the noise in the image.
Thank you, Josh. I missed one in here from Tommy Lim. If you have a modified if you've modified your DSLR to full spectrum, how do you process the files and get the color right in Deep Sky Stacker or Photoshop? I'll tell you, I never had an issue with color balance, and I think I just went into the images in Photoshop expecting to be balancing the colors myself to get just the pleasing look. It might be kind of shocking coming out of going from an unmodified to a modified, and then getting into Photoshop and maybe having it have a little bit of a tint, but to be honest, I just never really happened to me. And having moved into PixInsight, where the color calibration process is just a kind of specific workflow, and you do it, and as long as it looks good, you know that it's going to give you repeatable results. That I have concerned myself even less about it. So maybe someone who's currently using a DSLR, what is your a DSLR in Photoshop? What do you do for color balancing? How do you get your colors right? I know we still have some.
Okay, I'll take an answer to this, even though I don't exactly qualify there. In that I also use PixInsight and their background neutralization to get to the general color balance, and then afterwards I change it around. When I read the question, I asked myself, well, is there any difference between the processes I would take with a modified camera versus a non-modified camera? And I do have a modified 450, and I do take pictures with my non-modified DSLRs also. But the process for getting the ideal color balance is the same in each case. If I'm going to talk about doing it in PixInsight, obviously I use background neutralization and the color balance processes to do that. If I'm going in Photoshop, what I do is I take a part of what should be neutral sky background, and I sample it to find out what the color balances are. And usually they'll be fairly dim, that like out of 256, they'll be at about the 10 to 15 range. And if my R is 35 and my G is 15 and my blue is 15, then I know I've got too much red in the background sky. So what I have to do is bring the red down all the way through, and I will use a curves or a levels to do just that. I open up my Photoshop so that I can see all three of my histograms in their different colors, and I balance them out so that those histograms look somewhat the same. Not necessarily the same, because obviously if I've got a big red nebula in there, it's going to have more red. But you know what I mean. Particularly the base level has to be pretty much the same, where the curve first starts up. But I think the question, let me go back to what I started with before I started explaining how I do it. It's the same, I think, whether you're using a modified or a non-modified DSLR. So I don't think there's any special trick. You're probably going to have a little bit more red showing through in a modified DSLR, and it has to be brought back under control. But I don't think there's any substantial difference in the technique for doing it.
Alex, I'll comment on one thing that I do when I'm dealing with that, because also some CCDs are more red balanced, like the 8300 compared to the Sony's. So it's kind of the same thing as a modified DSLR versus a non-modified, which might be more sensitive to the blue and green. Is you want to? I want to, if I want to emphasize the blues and greens as much as the reds, is I'll do a couple of individual stretches on the blue and green channels to bring up their intensity to the red channel, but then slide the black point slider back over to get them to match. Like you said, you still want your background neutralized, so you want your black points to match, and maybe I'll be 15 or 20 wherever you want it. But even when I used the QHY8, there was very little blue information, and the only way to really get an overall balanced look, even if the background was balanced, was to do a couple of curve stretches on the blue and green channel individually, and then slide the black point back up to match them.
Right, and so whatever techniques you used in one, you have to use in the others. How much you have to push it in one compared to the other might be a little different, but I don't see that there's any inherent difference in color balancing between a modified and an unmodified DSLR, or between a CCD that is more sensitive in one range than another. Or a set of filters, for instance. If you've taken a set of RGB and your filters aren't matched like the Astrodon filters, you might have one that is brighter than the other one. So, but the process of balancing is all the same in any case. You got to move those histograms around and the levels around until they match up to please you.
Right, and I think the point that you made early on was a good one, was to get the histograms to look similar. If they're humps, the more similar their humps look, unless it is a very heavy HA region, then the more balanced your picture will look overall. If your red histogram is a big kind of long wave and your blue and green are just spikes, then you're not going to get a very, very overall balanced looking image.
One of the things I wanted to say, because I read it and I read it and I read it and I just didn't bring myself back to the DSLR days. A lot of people think about custom white balancing, and I think a lot of people think that the white balancing is really important, but in Deep Sky Stacker, when you're stacking, you can actually ignore the custom white balance and plan on doing it post-processing, and that's kind of the case. So I will say this: I am a big advocate for doing a custom white balance with DSLRs for terrestrial photography, but for astrophotography, not so much. I'm chuckling to myself because I was just talking to the guys before the show about something I was planning on emailing a guy asking if he'd be interested in presenting on a particular topic, and I just got an email from him asking if I'd be interested in having him on to present this particular topic. So I'm kind of laughing right now, but sorry about that. I was just
which may just be telling us that we'd better be a lot more careful when we think we're off the air.
I was wondering about that, but I don't think so. At
any rate, back to your questions.
Unless someone in the room emailed them, I don't know.
Back to the public here. What else do they have to ask us?
There is a specific one that maybe David would be good at answering that I posted up there. given that many DSLR cameras are going to full-frame sensors, what's the best approach to pre-processing images? For processing images captured using these cameras, they're 500 megabytes to gigabyte in size during processing 64 bits using PI. 32-bit apps fail due to the size of the files and memory requirements.
Yeah, so that's a tough one. In general, it just depends on what your image scale is natively, right? So if you're definitely oversampling with your data, then in PixInsight, whenever you do your debayering, you can use the super pixel mode, which basically takes a quad of pixels where you have 2 greens, 1 red, 1 blue, and turns it into a single pixel with red, green, and blue information, right? So that quarters your data volume, right? So that's a good way to approach it. But that's only really if your image scale is not appropriate, where you're at half an arc second per pixel or less or something like that. The other cases, Deep Sky Stacker, or whether you want to maintain that entire resolution, then the best option is probably to pre-process the data to do some amount of cropping if you're having memory issues, right? So like with Deep Sky Stacker, you could go through and basically crop your image down first, and turn it into something a bit smaller, so your resolution in terms of total pixel count is lower, so that you can actually get it running through Deep Sky Stacker. That's probably a little tedious with most tools, but I think generally your Canyon utilities or things like that have some sort of process where you can batch make some changes. Again, you want it's going to convert it to a TIFF instead of a RAW whenever you do that, or JPEG or whatever you choose, but you want to try to maintain that resolution. So you wouldn't want to use a JPEG. You'd want to use something like TIFF. You'd want to use it in 16-bit mode, and you'd want to do your crop. You can also do a scale at that point too, but keep in mind that any type of scaling you do, it's going to affect the calibration and everything, because you're no longer going to have a per pixel correct calibration result. In general, you can probably get away with it though. So those are all options that I might consider if I had some sort of memory issues limiting me from stacking my data with a full frame sensor like that.
What was the size of that sensor that was in his question? 50 megapixel, or I don't even remember what.
It said a full frame like the Nikon D810A.
D810A. So that's like, what is it? That's a 40-some megapixel?
Is it 48?
Oops. It's up there, yeah. So basically, if you don't have to print anything that big, which is pretty big, there isn't much detriment to using super pixel mode, and there might be some benefits to it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. You're gonna avoid all of the debayering issues, right, where you're interpolating between the pixels. And like I said, if you want to try to maintain as much resolution as possible, then that may not be the best choice. But if you're having memory issues where you simply can't get to your stack, then you're kind of out of luck there, right? So SuperPixel is a good quick way to do that.
Interesting, yeah. These 50, I'd love to buy a new camera, but that's some major processing power you need for those images. That's one of the turnoffs to like even the big censored, even the 16200. That's double the size of my files. So
it looks like it's 36.3 megapixels.
36.3, okay.
So not as high as we thought, but definitely pretty high.
Wait a year, they'll all be 50 megapixels in a year, except for the Astro cameras. We go slowly. All right, working my way back over, scanning through those. I know we posted the other ones in chat, so this should make it easy.
Josh, are those questions we see over in chat coming from you or from one of the public, and you're restating them?
They were coming from the Google Plus page.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I thought.
Okay.
And we didn't cover Sean's topic yet.
RC, yes, so yes, that was the one. RC SCT verse Newt. And Sean, would you mind asking your question, because I only have that written down in front of me, and I know it had to do with how you deal with specific optical aberrations that each one may have inherently. I think that was the question.
Right. So, like the corrector plate causes reflection issues with the SCT, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you don't really get that with the Newt or the RC, but the Newt, you have to have a coma corrector, so you can't just image with it straight. But the RCs, I was curious. I see most people use, what is it, the Teleview TD67. It's a compressor, right? That seems to be very standard.
Mm-hmm.
But does it need a flattener, really? I mean, you can image with it at f9 native, and do you have a flat field? Does anybody know?
An RC
No.
doesn't deliver a perfectly flat. It delivers one kind of flatness, but not another. It's coma free, but it's not.
Astigmatism.
I forget. You know what? Remember when I said, guys out there, that you're going to find out that we really aren't that smart here? Well, we are. I forget, but I just bought an RC last April, and
So it requires a corrector. If
and
you
it
want
requires a corrector. And what is it
okay.
correcting? What is that
And
corrector
then-
correcting?
Right. So okay. So with the Newt, you're going to have a coma corrector, and you likely need to replace the focuser anyway if you want to progress. So
And
for an RC,
you might have to move the primary mirror to get it to work and everything else like that.
right. So, but for an RC, then you still require a coma corrector type or a field flattener of some type, right? And then,
Sean, it'll cover a smaller sensor though. Not, I think people have done testing with an 8300, and it starts showing issues out at the edge of the field. But a small Sony sensor is usually not going to show very many issues.
yeah. So, and then the focuser seems to be very common that folks replace the focuser on those. Is it required?
Well, here's the thing you've got to remember, guys. You know, refractors don't actually give you better images than Newtonians or than anything else. But everybody thinks when they're looking through a refractor they're getting a better image. That's because I think that most refractors, these cute little APO refractors we pay so much money for, are exquisitely designed machines. While the Newts that we're all using were made in our backyards, and we just made them up. A high-quality Newt will beat the pants off a refractor because it's going to be a lot bigger. Okay, and when you're answering this question for somebody who wants to get into astroimaging, and they're saying, should I use a Newt? Should I use a RC? Should I use a refractor? What should I use? And I think that's what's happening in the question. What they're asking for is, what should I do for me? And when you're asking that question, I have to ask, like, what's money worth to you? How much do you like diffraction spikes? How much are you willing to boost this thing around to get it to work? How big amount are you willing to put underneath it? Because you don't buy just the tube, you've got to buy the whole system. And I think that if you want to get long focal length and things like that, you should really consider going to the RC or the modern SCT designs with the flatter fields and things like that. If you want to get the wide angle, you're better off generally with the refractor back there. And a good compromise for not much money is a Newt. But don't expect the Newt that you bought to do your Messier marathon can be put on a mount and just work for astroimaging. Things have to change before you do that. So I don't know that there is one answer to the question of what's the best tube to put in your system. I mean, I think you got to start with, do you like diffraction spikes? I mean, go there and start from there.
Yeah, and I think, John, I'd answer your question in a few different ways, or actually kind of the my opinion of your question in a few different ways. The RCs and Newts, so typically RCs up until a few years ago would have been made by a premium optics company, and now with Astronomics and the other vendors bringing in cheaper imported RCs, you know, the cheapness comes from somewhere, and they had to compromise on some parts, so they didn't produce a premium RC for a budget price. They produced a budget RC at a at a budget RC price, and the focuser is probably good enough for everyone's DSLR, but it's probably not good enough for like the 4-pound premium CCDs that we put on it. Same thing with the newts and the focuser being off the side. I think you need to put a better focuser. I think if you want to put a CCD camera on what I'll call a budget system, even though they're not necessarily cheap, but they're still not $10,000, you have to anticipate upgrading the focuser. You probably need a premium focuser, which is expensive, and that's why they didn't put it on there in the first place. And the SET is kind of a different system, and I don't know why I consider it different, but more because it seems like Meade and Celestron primarily concentrated on those, and well, you know, like the focuser moves the primary, so that's different in itself, and then it has a corrector, and you always wonder about light scatter with each additional layer of glass in there, and so in general, I don't know. Yes, they all need something. I won't count the edge in that because the edge still has a correcting lens inside of that baffle tube there, but they do need some correction. I wonder whether we could get a good comparison. What do we have to compare on these systems to get an apples-to-apples comparison? I don't know. Not having one, the grass is always greener. The simplicity of the Newtonian system really, as long as your mount can handle it, it's really attractive to me. And like I said, I don't have one, so maybe I'd come to hate one if I owned one. But
there's a little more tube flex, though, right, with the straight Newt than there is with an RC or an SCT, isn't there? Like you have to worry about it a little more?
Yep. But with these trusses coming out, hopefully they've made them more rigid, but yes.
And you are hanging that camera off the side, and what the side is can change depending on where it is. You know, you can also defeat part of that problem by just mounting the camera underneath the telescope and things like that. So you can get around. Believe me, you can do it anyway, and if you do it very, very well, it'll come out really well. By the way, where is this question coming from? Is it out of chat or
This
comment?
was in comments. This was in comments of this session.
Okay, so okay, I'm looking for it to make sure that I've actually understood the question. Okay, thanks.
And I think we got the other ones that are. Yeah. Oop, wrong click. Yeah, I think we have got the other ones in there. I'm just gonna go down my list. What is a histogram? David,
we need a whole session on
intro
statistics, and I've asked one guy to do it. I don't know if you've scheduled it up yet, Adam.
I haven't yet. I'm gonna look back into it because I don't remember what we left off on, but I will look back into that and see. But basically,
okay, yeah.
David, would you like to answer that?
Yeah, so it's something that working with people just starting off, I notice a lot of people don't quite understand what histogram is, right? So I thought I'd put this one in here. It's basically a measure of the different brightness levels, intensities in your image, right? So on the left is everything that has a value of 0, and on the right is everything that has a value of the max brightness of your sensor, right? And it's the vertical axis is showing the number of counts of pixels at each of those intensity levels. So typically what we see is a curve where it peaks up somewhere near to the left edge and then dies back off again, right? That's typically what we see in astrophotos, because mostly what we have is background with some amount of signal for the object, kind of mixed in close to the background level. So the histogram itself is just a measure, and when we're looking at modifying it, we need to keep that sort of stuff in mind. What we're actually changing is the relationship of the brightness levels and how many counts there are in terms of total pixels. I don't know if that helps or makes sense. But we talk about, making sure that the curve, the peak of the histogram is away from the left edge when we're, trying to look at exposure time and stuff like that, and understanding what that means is important.
Yeah, I'm sure if we had a full session dedicated to it, we could give you some quick examples, just playing around with an image in Photoshop, doing some levels adjustments and showing you how the histogram adjusts, even channel at a time, color channel at a time, or noise reduction, the way noise reduction impacts the histogram. And it all impacts it some way, and it's just a different way of representing the brightness levels in the image. So yeah, great.
I think there are a number of terms that we throw around that are from a basic statistics class, like what's a sigma? Why do they keep referring to this sigma thing? Why does it matter to me? What is noise? What does doubling increase it by the power of 4? Those kinds of things. When I say a rejection algorithm, what am I doing here? What am I rejecting? What's a bell curve? What's a Gaussian curve? These are things that we all throw around, but I'm not sure that we all have a common agreement when I'm talking to some people that are just starting out in the hobby. So I think we need a whole session on that, or two.
Sounds like an interesting session. I need to find someone who can do that.
We found somebody. We just need to, he said he couldn't do it until after January.
That's what it was. Okay.
Yeah. But call them. I mean, never mind. We'll talk about it later when the kids aren't around.
Eric's asking me to mention autofocus with the SCT focus system going back, because I said the moving primary. Well, I'm not going to say obviously. The SCT has a moving mirror. You turn a knob on the back of it, and the mirror moves forward and backwards, whereas most scopes are going to have a separate focuser. You turn the focus knob, and it extends out. Well, it's a focuser. Okay, so you kind of know the typical focuser. If you're not familiar with the SCT...
The reason I mentioned that, Adam, was that it's the opinion of those people that build telescopes that you really can't do successful autofocus by pushing on one edge of that primary mirror.
Yeah,
That's my opinion. That's the opinion of some of the scope builders.
Yeah, and I'm not gonna agree with them, but I'm also not gonna disagree with them. I think it comes down to the performance you're expecting to get out of it, and let me back up. Let me say it. So basically, if you put an autofocus motor on the knob of the SCT focuser, you can move the mirror back and forth just using this focus motor. Very simple. It has a gear. You can use a gear. It could work a number of different ways. If you use a stepper motor, then it always knows the position. It reports a number. So in a perfect world, say today it's 20 degrees out. Well, the last time it was 20 degrees out, my focuser position was at 14,400. Today it's 20 degrees out, so I could just put it right in that, right at that same position, and I should be set. That's the perfect world, and we'll just take that kind of as an example. In an imperfect world, the mirror as you turn it has a little bit of slop, so you should always try and focus it or turn the mirror in a particular direction. But you can take care of that with backlash compensation. So there are ways to overcome these things that Eric's talking about. But in general, I will say this: it's not like a premium focusing system where you're focused right down to that micron or those few microns. Just like the SCT isn't a premium imaging system. It's a good imaging system. It's a versatile imaging system, but I mean, Celestron knows that when they redesign the edge to have an even better, tighter tolerance mirror focusing system, well, I'm on that, because that's the one thing that a lot of SCT owners look to and say, oh, this is the one thing they need to improve. But it's kind of inherently built into the system. It's just the way it's been. And it's gotten better and better and better over time. For people like me who autofocus with their SCT edge on the knob, we can't use our mirror locks. If you do put an aftermarket focuser on the back of it, you don't have to do that. That's a really long-winded question to kind of say that, but it's something I've been dealing with a lot recently, just with autofocus and the issue that I'm having with my telescope that I'm not going to bring up because I don't know what the issue is, and I don't know whether it's with my telescope or my camera or my mount or whatever's going on. But yeah, that's basically a long-winded question to long-winded answer to that. And Josh is saying he knows I don't like to spend other people's money, but he's getting into LRGB CCD imaging and he wants to buy just one set of filters without having to upgrade in the future. Which ones are a good middle ground between price and quality? 2-inch. Now, Josh, I think this is a rhetorical question because you're not just...
No, it's coming from the
Okay.
Google Plus page.
Oh, I didn't see that.
I know you like to spend my money for me.
I'll spend your money, yeah. I don't feel bad about that. Maybe I'll end up with some of the stuff you get rid of shortly later. For now, Eric seems to be on that, gobbling that stuff up. Now, I see the 2 inches after that question, so I'm not sure if you're asking about the size of the filters or for a good manufacturer of the filters.
I'll explain. He's asking for the good manufacturer for middle ground filter. He's going to be using a STL 11,000 CM.
Mm-hmm.
So he needs 2-inch filters.
Yeah, so I'm still too cheap or too frugal to buy the Astrodons, even though I'm pretty convinced when I talk to everybody, they say, no, buy them. You'll see the difference. You'll notice the difference. I even have a way to quantify the Astrodons. Well, I should say I have a way to quantify the narrowband Astrodons, but a lot of people say the RGB Astrodons are even better if you're in light pollution. So we know they're the gold standard. So I'm too cheap to buy them. I have the Bader filters. I bought my Bader filters used. They very reasonably priced, maybe $250 for the LRGB. I want to say I paid $150 for the H alpha and the O3. I don't have an S2, and I have I have no complaints about the filters, except that I don't have Astrodons, and that's not a complaint about the filter. That's a complaint about me having to spend a whole heck of a lot of money to buy those other filters. So I can vouch for Bader's quality. And you know what? Bader filters on my mono CCD were worlds beyond what I got out of my DSLR camera. There's something in my head that tells me, despite everyone saying the Astrodons are much better, it's not going to be like that switch from the DSLR to the mono. It's just you're going to get a little bit more. You're not going to have as much gradient, but I still want them.
So, Adam, let me make a comment on this because he specifically says that that he does not want to upgrade in the future. So, kind of like Alex mentioned earlier, it really depends on what your expectations are for quality and what results you're looking for. I went from the Astronomics to the Astrodons from the Astronomics to the Baders to the Astrodons. To me, if I'm spending a lot of money on other stuff, and this is a personal thing, I just assume I have the best filters. But they are more money, so if you're okay, for example, in your O3, you're probably going to see a little bit of halos around your stars. If you're okay with that, you're still going to get really nice images, and some world-class images have been produced not only with Baders but also even with Astronomics. If another good thing is to search on Astrobin. And the way I like to look at it is find the best pictures that are made with each type of gear, and you can see what's possible if you get the most out of it. Don't just assume because you see a bad picture with some gear that you can't get anything good. Find the best pictures made with that gear, and then you know what's possible and what you can get out of it. I always recommend the Astrodons to people, but especially for 2-inch filters, that's going to be a small fortune. And much more so than like the 1 1/4-inch ones that I have on my camera. So I would also say, like Adam, the Baders they're not even half the price, right?
They're less than half the price. I think I'm not sure what they cost new, but
right. Yeah, they're much more affordable, and I would say that they're the betas are 100% better than the DSLR, and I'd say the Astrodons are maybe like 30% better than the betas or something like that. If I had to put a number on it.
Don't forget, guys, what we're asking here is that same basic question: what's money worth to you? You saw the big long thread that we've had recently on cloudy nights about the two things that are not said about mounts or something like that. And the point is that you do have to have a very good mount. But if you keep waiting until you've got a good mount, you may never take an astro image. The one thing I've said on that thread is that the perfect is the enemy of good. We'll never get started if we wait until we get everything working the way we should. I also want to quote Richard Wright, who has been on our programs before, and he did a presentation at RTMC a couple of years back where he was explaining what you get for your dollars. And you can get 90% of what you're after with $3,000. And you can get 95% of what you're after with $6,000, and you can get 98% with $10,000. Now, what's money worth to you? You realize that we can all tell the difference between 90% of a good astro image and 95% of a good astro image and probably 100% of a good astro image. You know what I mean? So you really have to ask what is of value to you. If you are going to be forever before you take images because you have to save up for your Astrodons, go get your Orions. My first Astromart photo of the day, by the way, it was an Astromart photo of the day twice, was taken with the set of Orion narrowband filters. I think there's 7 nanometer bandpass, and I think the set costs $250. And it's a beautiful picture, still one of my favorites. I don't know how it can ever be photo of the day twice, but I guess not many people were turning in photos, so they used it again. But at any rate, just take your pictures. I mean, get out there and use what you've got to start with for sure. But if you really just want the best, well, that's easy enough to do. Go for the most expensive, and they probably are the best in our business. Most of the time, you get what you pay for. Okay, but if you can't pay for the best, well, go get something and get working.
Well, I can either afford the filters or the camera. Which should I buy?
I might say, there's so much to learn in this hobby that waiting until you do get the best, you're just hurting yourself. Just to have a decent mount and get started and start working on processing. A lot of it's in the processing itself.
Very much so. And somebody's asked a question about DSLR versus CCD here. And I think we've got to give you the same answer on that, that you can get wonderful pictures with either. Eventually, you will want to get to the DSLR because it will give you a higher top end. But it'll also cost you 2 to 3 times as much money, particularly once you buy filters for it, as we were just talking about. So use what you got. And, yeah, DSLRs are getting better and better and better and better, but they haven't caught CCDs, and they probably won't catch CCDs for a while. And so, like I said, use what you got.
Yep. And that's a hard concept for me to come across. Something you're going to buy and never have to upgrade, because being a gearhead in this hobby, you always buy something never wanting to upgrade, and then a year later they come out with the new version, and you have to have it. That 16200 camera has piqued my interest, and I'll tell you, it's an expensive camera, and buying Astrodons for it doubles the price. And
Adam, I still use my digital SLR for wide field shots. It's very good for that.
Oh yeah. I agree. I mean,
And comets.
Big advocate of DSLRs.
Comets? Yeah.
And comets, yeah.
Hey, Adam, Bill brought up a really good point that sometimes we forget to mention, is that if you're getting into the hobby and you're saving up to get into it, if you come on any of these forums or you go on Astrobin, half the hobby and maybe more is processing data, and there is data everywhere to process. practically anyone you ask for it doesn't mind sharing it too. So if you see something, it won't hurt to ask for it. But if you just search around cloudy nights, or we did a session at one point on processing professional data. There's just so many sources for it, and so you can start learning 50 or 60% of the hobby before you even spend a penny. There's even free processing programs or free trials to try them out. So don't hesitate to jump in and see what you think before you spend money.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It'll lead into another question that just popped up in front of me. Anything you started astrophotography, and I knew that the images were not as you see them, as you look through them through the telescope, but I didn't realize how much processing really had to do with it, and how much kind of artistic liberty that we had in processing our images. And I'm not going to say that's the #1 thing I wish I knew when I started, but it's the one thing that a new imager coming into it should really get accustomed to and realize they have to familiarize themselves with the processing steps. Because basically, when I got into it, I had the same I probably thought the same thing as all of you out there. You take a DSLR camera, you throw it on a telescope, click, click, clink, you get the exposure, you look at it, and you've got a galaxy, right? No. It's long exposures, and you barely have to look at your data until you're processing it. You basically can let everything go. But it is all about the data, and it's all about getting good data. And once you get that good data, well, then it's all about processing. So it's... Go ahead. I think I completed that point there. Go ahead, David.
Okay, I'll add one more thing. Also kind of off of what Bill said, but tying in here. We're talking about processing and all these things. I think you can make it a more generic statement. It's about experience, right? And that applies to the acquisition side as well as the processing side, right? And by getting something early on rather than waiting to go off and purchase something, you're already gaining experience. And realistically, you end up learning more basics by using simpler, cheaper things than you would by using the best equipment right off the bat, right? So it is a learning process. It's a journey, the whole way, not necessarily to a specific end, but it's a learning process, and gaining that experience is extremely useful and makes more of a difference than anything else.
Yeah, there's so much to learn before you learn which questions to ask. And just getting a little toehold in a few of the little techniques and familiarizing yourself with what you're going to be doing, and what you're going to be staying up late acquiring, and then early in the morning you're rushing to see it because you can't wait to see what you got. And it's I really enjoy it, but it's not the most romantic feel. You show people your images, and they ooh and ah over them, and they don't know they don't know all the nitty-gritty that went into it. They don't think about that stuff, and you're supposed to create the image, so they don't know that. They don't. I don't know. You look at the Mona Lisa, you don't see Leonardo da Vinci in a dirty room with a lady posing in front of him. You see the painting. You see the. So I think that's kind of. You don't think about what goes on behind the curtain.
Can I make one more comment about that, Adam? I think if you jump in without the experience of processing, without the experience of gathering data, and buy expensive equipment, you're likely to be disappointed and ask the question, why did I do this in the first place? I don't really get it. So I think it's better to start off with the simple mount and the simple camera, whatever it might be, and then work your way up before you make the investment, rather than buying as much equipment as you can right off the bat. That's probably a mistake.
Yeah.
And I say that actually because I'm helping someone right now who has done just that. And he has sent me a note saying, I don't get this. Why did I buy all this equipment? He got an AP mount and an 11-inch SCT.
Adam, what I tell a lot of people is just to go get a tracking mount. If you ask them, do they have a digital SLR camera, and they say they do, I say, well, go get a tracking mount.
Yeah.
Yeah, like an Astro Track or something like that.
Yep. Well, I always ask what they have.
I always tell them to go borrow something first.
Mhm.
There's always somebody around the club that's got something you can use for a while till you figure out what you want. Hey, we got a couple of other questions that we haven't touched on yet. Amazingly, we've done a pretty good job catching all the other ones. What's the advantage to selecting 2x2 or 3x drizzle when stacking using a DSLR? And what are the pros and cons of saving images in 32-bit versus 64-bit? That's another one of those questions that we get on that imaging statistics for dummies program that we got to put on at some point.
Yeah, I think we covered the 32 64-bit kind of well, I think, without going much further.
Yeah.
I know David.
Well, there was another question about 32 and 64-bit, which, as I was reading, was about the color values. You know, the intensity values. Or was I reading it wrong?
The one we answered was dealing with, file formats, 32-bit versus 64 file formats.
But there was another one. Let's get on the 2 power by 3 power drizzle.
Okay, that one's
that drizzles.
Yeah, so that one's pretty straightforward. I think both I or Josh can talk to that one. I'll start off a bit here. So, drizzling can be very powerful for regaining resolution. Essentially, all it's doing is trading signal-to-noise ratio for resolution. So by going to a higher scale, 2x or 3x or higher, and using a smaller drop shrink factor, you are increasing the noise. So you're decreasing the signal-to-noise in your image. But by doing that, you have the potential for gaining resolution. The caveat, there's a big caveat to that, which is you have to actually have a virtual image presented to the sensor that has higher resolution than what you're currently sampling. So that basically means that your optics and your sky have to have data that's well above that level. So if you're seeing 3 arc seconds per pixel and you're imaging at 1 arc second per pixel, then you're not really going to gain much by drizzling even at a 2x level. There might be a marginal increase there, but it's going to be pretty small. So going to 3x is going to do nothing but drop signal to noise with really no benefit. So it's one of those things. It really depends on your setup. What you will actually achieve out of it. I know, Josh, do you have anything else you want to add to that?
Yeah, and it's not only that, but it's what your data will support. So if you only have 15 subs that you're trying to do a drizzle with, you're probably not going to be thrilled with the results. If you have 50 subs, it might support a 2x drizzle pretty well. And I mean, the more noise you're going to interject into it, the more integration you want to actually take advantage of that. So I've one time ever used 2.5 was actually a 2.6 drizzle stack, and that was because I was trying to match FSQ 85 data. You need an awful lot of really high quality data to go beyond 2x. So.
Yeah. One other point. It also say you have an 8 megapixel sensor when you're starting out, and you do a 3x drizzle. Even if you have the resolution where that will actually benefit you and the number of frames where it will actually benefit you, you're still going to end up with a 72 megapixel image, right? So you get into the same problems that some of the other things we answered before. Do you need a 72 megapixel image? What are you going to do with that, right? Are you going to print a massive poster on a wall? Okay, well maybe that's something you want to do. But if it's just going to be on your computer monitor, there's no real benefit for that, right? We don't have the resolution that supports viewing those things. And so it's going to end up just chewing up memory and hard disk space rather than providing a benefit in cases like that as well.
Yep, I agree. Adam, do we have another question? I have a question / topic that
I think there was one question up there. And maybe it's the same question as the 62 versus 30, 64 versus 32-bit. Oh, where did it go? I was just at it. But I believe somebody was asking about the difference between processing in 64 bits and processing in 32 bits as far as color depth and things like that. Am I reading their question wrong? Where was that? Okay, I'm lost.
Was it in Q&A or was it somewhere else?
That's where I'm going. I had it. I had found it there while you guys were talking. No, here it is. It's Josh has retyped it. Given that many DSLR cameras are going to full frame sensors. Okay.
Yeah. So we did cover that one.
Okay, you did, except that is the difference between 64-bit and 32-bit?
So he's referring to 32-bit applications, which DSS is a 32-bit. So that's just a memory limitation, right? So he can't go over a certain amount of memory size when he's trying to stack something.
Okay. Okay.
Right.
It's not like when we're in when we're finished with a or when we're over in Photoshop and we have to convert some 32-bit files down to 16-bit in order to use some filters and so forth.
Right. That was. We didn't exactly cover that, but that's another good point.
And I thought that's what the question was about, and that's why I thought there were two different questions.
Right.
Okay. I'm sorry. I'll go back to mute.
So here's another topic that I actually talked with Hytham about this some here recently. I think a lot of maybe us with a little more experience and who are really obsessed with processing to a super high level, when we view images either on Astrobin or we're trying to give each other feedback on images, we really open them up full size, 100%. And so just kind of like we're talking about here, with these massive files, like sometimes if we're doing 2-panel mosaic, it might be a 100 megabyte file. We really pay attention to going down to the details and every single little star looking good, and sometimes doing that really limits what you can do for the overall impact on the image because you can't stretch it quite as much. You can't increase the saturation quite as much, and you don't want to use as much noise reduction because when you open it up and look at it on your computer and you're zoomed in way in, then to me at least, the image falls apart when you do that. However, it seems like one of the more popular trends recently in image processing is to process an image like it would look on your computer screen if just looked at full size, whatever your monitor is full size. And so, maybe the attention to the details isn't quite as exquisite, but the overall impression sometimes is a lot more dramatic because they don't have to pay attention to the details quite as much. I'm just curious what your guys' thoughts are on that. I think maybe it's not necessarily a terrible way to go if you are just shooting for a like a 16 by 10 print of a picture that people aren't going to be up against, with their nose up against it.
My images always look better rescaled to 50%.
I guess that's one of my biggest problems with pixel peeping was just that, right? How many of us are going to actually take a look at the print in its full resolution when you're just viewing it on your desktop? The only time I ever do is unless if I'm looking to highlight very specific small-scale features in my already undersampled images that I want to try to bring the most out. But if you take a look at even some of the best in the world, like the Fabian Nayers and Marco Lorenzis that all image with, funny enough, Beta filters. As if you ever want to go look at their stuff. They use Beta or Beta, however you pronounce it. But they rarely, if ever, put up their images in 100% full-blown resolution. I don't know. For me, it's just it's a personal opinion. Sometimes I get annoyed with pixel peeping at others, and then I get annoyed with it myself because I just constantly look at my images at 400% and think, what am I doing? It's pointless. It's not going to be under that kind of scrutiny.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly very much appreciate the skill and the dedication that goes into processing an image in a way that you can blow it up and look at it at 400%. And then if you really want to print it out that large, then you have the option to do it. but sometimes we're living in this sort of, I guess, virtual world where you are looking at a dozen stars at a time instead of the thousands that you'll see if you're ever looking at it like it was a picture. Because these days the pictures is a zoomed-in version on a monitor and not a real picture.
One piece of advice that I've gotten from a lot of different people, I go to a lot of imaging workshops because I try to put them on. And almost all of them say that you do your final sharpening, final presentation, and stuff like that when you know where your image is going to go. You have a standard that you finish the image to this point, but it doesn't go out to anybody until you know where it's going. And if it's going to be posted on cloudy nights, then it's got to be resized to this size and sharpened to that level and then put out there. But if it's going to be going to the magazine or a poster shop or something like that, it's another ball game, and you're not finished. You got to go do something else with it. So you always get your image to a point, but it's never finished until you know how it's going to be used.
Well, I'll talk about something on that note because this is something that happens to me every so often. Most of us post our images on AstroBin, and so I posted my most recent, well, I shouldn't even go that far. My most recent image, I oriented it vertically. So when I post my images that I orient vertically on AstroBin, and I'm shooting with my 8300 sensor, which is what, 20-some hundred pixels high and 4-ish wide. So I find that when I open it up on my monitor that I'm looking at here, which is a 27-inch monitor, it just doesn't support it. And it drives me nuts because clicking that full size on AstroBin on a horizontally oriented image, I'm like, oh, that's pretty nice, that's pretty nice. If I vertically orient it, it just seems like it falls apart. And I think that kind of touches on that, where it'd be much easier if I truly had control over the presentation, which, and I will say this, ever since I started printing my photos, I do go into each image with print in mind. And there will be targets that I will know that I cannot get enough of a field in mind to make it as big as I want, and I'll just plan on shooting a mosaic. And I have a few in mind that I'm kind of excited to come up on, but I want a mosaic bigger than the resolution of my camera will support. So that's the way it is, or an image.
Let me add my 3 cents on this one. Josh and I had a long discussion the other day on just this issue. And I can't speak for everyone that's here, but I think that we all extract out the most detail at the highest resolution that the data will support and our processing will allow us to do. What we post on AstroBin and what other people post, to me, it doesn't make, I don't really care. I mean, if they like it, fine. If they don't like it, fine. If they post a crappy image and it doesn't hold up under full resolution, well, I mean, that doesn't affect me, and I don't really care if they get more likes than I do or less. It's irrelevant. What's important to me is that I get the best out of it, and when I send it to a few of my friends and they look at it, they don't zoom in and say, oh, by the way, you know, you really did this, didn't you notice? In which case I have to go back and do it all over again because they're probably right. So, I mean, I don't worry about what other people do and what other people post. And I don't think any of us should care about that. It's all for us. Just my opinion.
I agree with that, but one of the things I'll say is I love taking an image that makes me want a bigger monitor, or a higher resolution monitor, or you know, I used to take terrible images, and they were noisy and this and that, and I love looking closer and closer, and I kind of strive to get sharper and just inherently sharper images, naturally sharper, not by sharpening or noise reduction or anything like that. So,
by the way, you're completely right about how AstroBin represents things, and I always try to not post an image that's landscape because it's the limitations of the pixels they have to work with, and I don't know exactly what it is, but it always works better the other way. always works better as tabloid versus landscape. But if it's a landscape image, it's a landscape image.
Yeah, I'll add one other thing, which is how I kind of approach things. Typically, I go through a process where I'm very careful about all my noise reduction, and I'm looking at a very detailed per pixel level. And then once I'm done with my processing, I'll take it and I'll resize it for wherever I'm going to post it or whatever I'm going to do with it. And from that point forward, I will do additional processing based on what the scale is then, right? Can I stretch it more? Can I boost the saturation? For each application of where that image is going to go, right? So I kind of take it, an extra step if, the data can support that at the new scale, right?
Well, one other thing, when we post these images on AstroBin as JPEGs, you are definitely degrading the image just as a JPEG as compared to the TIFF. And you can just see that by blowing up that image on AstroBin, comparing it to a nice TIFF on your monitor.
Now, how many? This is probably a question for David. In fact, I think this is David's specialty. What is the bit depth that a monitor can display?
Well, generally it's 8 bits, right? So the bit depth is 8 bits. That means your 16-bit data is lost once you start trying to display it. However, there are new monitors, like the one I have is a 10-bit display. There are some that are 12. So there are, higher bit depth monitors. That also doesn't mean that they are higher dynamic range. They may still have the same brightness levels that a monitor has, although that's changing as well. There are high dynamic range monitors coming out so that you could theoretically have a 12-bit monitor that is high dynamic range and represent your data totally differently on that display than you could on a normal monitor, right? So it would be much more natural and a closer fit to what your data actually looked like in your raw image with an application like that. But in general, we typically are looking at an 8-bit display with a traditional contrast range of most monitors and TVs, right?
And can our eyes come anywhere close to recognizing those differences?
Oh, absolutely. Our eyes have a tremendous dynamic range, especially since our eyes are moving all the time, right? So you can take advantage of the fact, your brain can take advantage of the fact that you're not always looking at the same thing at the same time, right? Which is when you look at a landscape and you look at the sun and then your eye is moving slightly, you can look at the ground and sky and see all that, and your brain is building a picture of it and building this very high dynamic range image in your head.
Okay, so maybe that wasn't my question then. Maybe it's not can our eyes perceive the dynamic range as much as the small gradations between each bit depth. So like an 8-bit is how many different steps?
256.
256. So if you're looking at
That's JPEG size.
versus 256, can you tell the difference? But
yeah, if you go from like, someone's bringing up a picture. Yeah, Josh is bringing up a picture here of gradations. So for example, if you look at a grayscale image with 256 brightness levels displayed across the screen, you will actually be able to see the transition at those 8 levels. Our eyes can see that bit depth. They can see the step in between. You go to 10, you can still see a little bit of it, but it's starting to disappear. 12 is kind of pushing the limits of what the eye can see, right?
Yep. So Adam, just so people understand what we're talking about, I pulled up.
Yep, I clicked your. Yep, they see it. Yeah, so basically it represents the gradations: 0%, 3%, 10%, 20%, and just gives you an idea. And then that bottom line shows you 1% at a time. And I'll tell you that bottom line looks all the same to me. Maybe that's why. Maybe that's why I don't notice certain aberrations in my photographs. Maybe it is my eyes. But.
Well, it could be your monitor settings as well.
Yeah.
I mean, for whatever reason, I've tried a bunch of different monitors, and the display on my laptop far exceeds the quality of any other monitor I've tried. And I can see these clear as day. The the gradation, even in the bottom row, I can definitely see at least every maybe 2 or 3%. If I look on my iPhone, the darks are very hard to differentiate. If I look on my big monitor, the lights are hard to differentiate from me.
Yeah, I think I could probably, on the dark row, I could probably distinguish about 3%. Now, this may not be accurate because I don't know what Google's doing to this. They might be compressing something, but they're interesting. You know, I feel like maybe, I don't know, you see a high resolution, like a 4K video, and it's really dynamic, really dramatic. I think maybe the resolution might give you more benefit than that bit depth that we always pay so much attention to. So maybe, I don't know, maybe we need big, small sensors again. Back to where we started.
Did you see the post? I think it was in Cloudy Nights, but it may have been someplace else. Somebody was at the Consumer Electronics Show, and they've got new monitors coming out. And I just thought about, wait a minute, we're going to have to reprocess all our data someday so that it can actually accommodate that?
That's actually what stimulated my
Yeah.
kind of train of thought on it, because I thought, do we need monitors with deeper color depth? And
I think that we should all stick to taking DSLR pictures and looking at the viewfinder on the back of because that's always the best pictures we've ever taken, were the first time we looked at the viewfinder on the back of an LCD of a Canon, 20D in my case. So
I guess something that's important to note, though, when you're talking about high-resolution TVs or monitors and everything else with that, and the arguments that I always get with my friends is that what is normal viewing distance? If you're looking at from a processing standpoint and only being a few centimeters away from your screen and seeing that incredibly high resolution that you want to support, sure, it works great. But when I look at TVs and monitors, I'm usually several feet away. I don't know. That's just my thought on it. If I'm going to stick my nose right against the screen, you could definitely see the difference. But if you stand back, all looks the same.
Plus, you're only focusing on the center part of your eye. You're not focusing on the edges. So it's a relatively small, finely focused field of view.
mm-hmm.
do we need to go through and see if we've got all the questions? What are we up to, an hour and a half so far?
Yeah, we're up to an hour and 36 minutes, and I had a few questions pop in on my cell phone that I think I'm going to have to take another day because they're all they're getting cut off and I can't find them on Google. And when I click them, it doesn't bring me the link. So I'm going to try and figure out where they've gone because there's
I see somebody's asked. There's been a couple of people ask questions that we just can't answer today. For instance, how astro image acquisition, how to do LRGB, the best methods. That's what we do every Sunday. How do we take pictures? How do we process pictures? It's just, Sammy, it's just too big a question to try to answer all in one place. And then who asked? Yanni asked what we wish we knew when we started astrophotography. Those are two questions that I don't think we've touched on yet tonight, and I don't think we can. I don't think we can answer those questions. They might make great topics for. I think we did that one about what we wish we knew, like when we were first starting out with the Astro Imaging channel. We did a little bit of it, but I think there's more to do on that. So.
Yeah, go ahead, Josh.
There is one new one that came in on Google Plus page. I don't think I missed this. I understand the concept of more resolution, but can you explain why I would need more sensitivity? The question comes from Binning, and which one I should use where.
That's the question that I saw, but I didn't get the second half of it.
That's a difficult question. I don't know that we can answer that one tonight, Adam.
Yeah. So I think we're gonna put this one off till the next open session, which may be next week if we don't have anything scheduled by then. I will schedule something in the meantime. I do see Jason's in the room. Jason, are you there? I saw your mic get unmuted. Maybe he's in the room, maybe he's not. Might be away from his computer. We're going to give you an opportunity to speak about your image next week. We're going to try and do this where we push it on to the next week, so everyone has about a week's notice to get that in. And if you're available, you're welcome to join us. But we have gone on for an hour and 40 minutes, so unless anybody has anything quickly they want to get off their chest, I'm going to end it. And yeah, Jason has mic problems. Perfect. We'll get it all figured out by next week. Thank you guys all for coming. Feel free to check out our website. And now on our website, you have contacts for me. So if you have to get a hold of me, it's on there. You can see all of our videos. Enjoy it. Try and break it, just not permanently.
And remember, anybody who has some things that they need to tell us or would like to do a presentation, we're nothing special. I mean, Adam's got the energy to keep it organized and stuff like that, but really, we really could use some new voices as far as, you know, as technique or some new equipment you've got that you'd like to explain and show us how it works or something like that. We really do need your volunteering to come along and just do this. All you got to do is sit at your computer and share your screen and talk. That's all we're doing. We're not anything special. So I'll mute myself again. Bye.
Thank you, Alex. Thanks again. And guys, we will see you next week. Have a good one.